And that'll kind of set the tone for what we're talking about this week or in this lesson. It kind of bring things into play for us. And it reads like this: Israel's only Savior. But now, this is what the Lord says. He who created you, Jacob, he who formed you, Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by your name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I give Egypt for your ransom, Cush and Seba in your stead. Since you are precious and honored in my sight, and because I love you, I will give people in exchange for you, nations in exchange for your life. Do not be afraid, for who I am with you. I will bring your children from the east. I will gather you from the west. And I will say, go north, give them up, and to the south. Do not hold them back. Bring my sons from afar, and my daughters from the ends of the earth. Everyone who is called by my name, who I created for my glory, who I have formed and made. So when you look at those verses there, and now good morning to all those out on Facebook and YouTube. Like I said, I just read Isaiah 43, 1 through 7. And he's saying, and what God is saying there, and what the prophet Isaiah was telling people that God gave him Savior says, God is telling you, you are mine. He's called you. He's named you. He knows who you are. So you don't have to fear anyone else because you are called by, he has summoned you by his name and you are his. And so no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're going through, you will be, he will be there to protect you. Going through the waters, the floods, and through the fire, he's always there for you. So you think about in the story of the three Hebrew boys. They already knew God was with them. And even though this story here in Isaiah was written after that time when they went through the fire, but we always say God is the same, yesterday, today, and tomorrow. So even though these words had not been spoken at the time, it was still the same God. They knew God was with them, and he was going to protect them if they kept their faith, if they lived that faith. And they took their faith in there among that fiery furnace. So our lesson today comes out of Daniel chapter 3. And even though the book goes through, it uses 19 to 28, I'm going to go back and hit some of the earlier verses to give you the background for this story. Because in this story, we look at the three Hebrew boys. And the names that we give there in the Bible are not their Hebrew names. Those are the names that the Chaldeans and Babylonians had given them when they were taken into the court of Nebuchadnezzar. And what had happened in this time was Judah had been overrun. First, they were overrun by Egypt. And then, when Egypt was defeated by the Babylonians, the Chaldeans, they were then taken into captive by the Chaldeans and lived in Babylon. And it's in this part here that we get the story, see. And in chapter 1, we learn that King Jehoiakim, these names, I know are going to get rough in some of these things, but Jehoiakim was the king of Judah at the time. And he was not a very righteous king. He had done a lot of evil things in God's sight, and he had put the images into the church. And he formed alliances with whoever would take them over. When Egypt had taken over Judah, he paid his tributes to Egypt. And then when the Egyptians and the Chaldeans and the Babylonians went to war, and the Chaldeans prevailed, he turned his alliance to the Chaldeans, and he even allowed them to take things from the temple. And that's how these three boys now ended up in Babylonia. Because at that time, they had taken young men of the royal family and nobility into the courts, into the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. So Daniel and these three boys, we know them in the story as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But that were the names, again, those were the names given to them by the Babylonians. This is more of a lesson today. Ain't a whole lot of shouting in this, but it's a history lesson in this. There's some things that we need that you can get. And so, we call them by these names. Their Hebrew names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were their Hebrew names. And the Chaldeans, the Babylonians had given them the names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And those names had meanings. So Shadrach was the command of the god Aku, the moon god of the Chaldeans. And Meshach meant in those Chaldeans a guest of the king. Remember, they were in the king's court. They had been taken in to the court of King Nebuchadnezzar. And Abednego, and a lot of some verses use it, Abednego. That term meant slave of the god Nebo, or Naku. So those are the names given to them by the Chaldeans when they were taken into the court. And they were taken in because when he asked for the tributes from Jehoiakim, he said, send me some people of nobility and of the royal family who had a great aptitude for learning, who could learn all things. Again, when people try to take you, the first thing they want to try to take is your best and your brightest. And we see that in our society today. When they try to assimilate in, they want to take in the best. They kind of discard the rest to the side, but they want to take in your best and your brightest, and then they want to put them out front and say, look what we, like, yep, and hold them to a banner. We saw the same thing go in when the schools finally integrated. They don't want nothing to do with it, but when they did integrate, they wanted the best of us to come to them, to be a part of them. In the university, when they didn't want anyone else, they wanted to take our best. Even in the sports, they want to take the best and put them into their programs, into these Power 5 schools, but they want to leave the rest to the side. So they always, when somebody wants to take you over, they always want to try to remove your best from among you. So he had taken these three boys into the court and to teach them the ways and instruct them in things in that Chaldean and Babylonian culture. He wanted the best to come there. Now, as the background of this story goes, is King Nebuchadnezzar made an image. Now, they don't tell us what the image looked like, but they say it was a big image, though. It was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. And I think a cubit was more than like 2 or 3 feet. So that 60 cubits high was a very tall statue. It wasn't that wide, but it was set up in the plains of Dura, so it could be seen from a long way. And as in this story, he called all his court together, all his people, and told them, when he summoned them, he summoned all the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the advisors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, all his provincial officers, officials, He called them in and said, hey, I'm going to make this statue. And when I put this statue out there, I want all you, when all the horns play and the flutes play and all the music plays, all kinds of music, but then I want you must fall down and worship this statue. And this is just a statue of gold. It had no power. It was not a god. But this is what they had made up. And the thing about, place in place, some of the things that we in our lives put ahead of God. We make images of a lot of things. We'll put our possessions ahead of God sometime in our faith. I was saying earlier, when I read back in Isaiah, he said, I'm with you, but, he's always claimed me, but we'll put things ahead of what God has said for us, or the place he's put us in. He said the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, he had all kinds of music, all things there. And so all the peoples of every language must bow down to this image and fall down. Like I say, now we don't necessarily have to have some king to put things on. We'll put things ourselves in front of God that we will bow down to in front of coming God. I can't go to church today. I got to go out and make this money. I've heard people say, I got in my car need washing today. Would you put that ahead of coming to church and worshiping your God? So are you living by that faith you have in it? So we got to be careful what we let come ahead of God. Because he told you back in Isaiah 43, those verses I read there, that he's already claimed you. He know you by name. You are his children. He will be there with you through the floods and through the waters and through the fire. He's always there. But if you can live up and keep your faith and live by that faith that he's given you or that you have in him. And then again, come to the next part of the story, you get the haters. When the Hebrew boys, all these perfects and people, they've taken these boys and brought them in and taught them all the things, so they put them over some of the affairs of the kingdom. And that's when the haters come in. Now they brought you in, they took the best of you, but when the best of you started to outshine them, then they got to find a way to kind of see if I can bring them back down a notch. And you think about it in our society. We have these people that are there. Pick my words quiet so I don't get in trouble with people here. They will let themselves be used. That's a good word. By people, but when they get to a certain place and so high, they're getting a little too big now. We got to bring them back down. So now these haters of these boys that made it have been brought into the kingdom. They excelled Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into things. And now these same prefects and officials that came in, they say, look here, King. These are the people you brought in. You put them over us and ahead of us, but they ain't doing what you said. You said every time the music play, we got to bow down or be thrown into the fiery furnace. Say, but we watching them. They ain't bowing down. And ain't nobody else had a problem, but they say, again, when your haters come in, they start to see you getting a little too big. Then they got to try to bring you back down. And when Nebuchadnezzar heard this, he'd already made this. If you don't bow down this statue, you immediately be thrown into the furnace. It ain't gonna be no time where you had to go right then. And so, okay, so these have been brought in now. And he say some of them in front of me. So he sent his best of his troops, his best men out to him. Say, go and bring these men to me. And when they brought them to him and they asked him, say, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my God and to worship the image of gold I have set up? And now when you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the zither, the lyre, the harp, the pipe, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I have made very good, But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then, and this line here, this is when he starts tempting God to say, but then what God will be able to rescue you from my hands. Now, Isaiah's already told you back in that hand, so I'm with you no matter what. You are in my hands. I got you. I got you covered. You are my people. I call you by my name. So they knew who their God was and who could rescue them. So they wouldn't fall for what the King Nebuchadnezzar was trying to place in front of them, what he was trying to get them to do. They were not going to turn their back. They were going to live their righteous life by faith. And I love the reply that the three Hebrew boys gave him. Say, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar. And I love these words here. So we don't need to defend. We do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the furnace, the God we serve will be able to deliver us from it, is able to deliver us from it, and he will. Again, what I said, what I read back in Isaiah, he told you, I'm with you no matter where you go. Into the fires, I'm there. In the waters you go, I'm always got you. I call you by my name. So they're just repeating what they knew about their God and their faith. So this God that we serve will be able to deliver us from your majesty's hands. But the next part will say, but even if he doesn't, I want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your God. We will not serve your gods and worship an image of gold you had set up. Remember, they were still living under the first covenant here, and one of the first commandments was, you will have no God before me. There'll be no graven images. So they knew what their faith had taught them and what their covenant was with God. Now we get into the part of the story for today of Nebuchadnezzar and his fury and his anger at what these young boys had told him. But I want to still remember, just keep those two words, serve God. And so then in verse 19, then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. And he ordered the furnace heated up 7 times. I mean, 7 times always was a term used in the Bible a lot of times for perfection. So, I mean, if he heated up the furnace 7 times as normal, and then what was customary, I mean, that was probably about as hot as the furnace could get. He had turned it all the way up. And I love go back and look at the word and say he was so mad that his face was distorted. Now, you think about the anger you had to be. I mean, I won't say I've never been that mad, but I probably have. But, you know, we're so mad, you see people's face just tighten up when they won't do. But this is all about a golden image. This is not a God that had done anything for them. They didn't have, Nebuchadnezzar didn't have the history of that image and that God that these Hebrew boys had with their God. He knew, they knew what the God of Israel had done for them. They knew that the God of Israel had brought their people out of Egypt and out of bondage, had carried them through the desert and through the wilderness. He had parted the Red Sea and drowned the enemies that were following them. He had gave them land to inhabit that they didn't have to fight for. They knew what their God had done for them. They had faith in their God. And say, so no matter what you say, we're not going to do what you want because we know our God. We're going to live by our faith because we know our God is real and what he said to us. And again, I'm going to go back to that's why I read that Isaiah 43. He's already told you, I got you. I know you by name. I call you by name. I call you out. You are my people. Wherever you go, I'm with you. In the waters, I'm there to protect you. In the fire, I'm there. So they knew the promises of their God. See, and Nebuchadnezzar, in order to furnace fired up 7 times hotter than normal. And in verse 20 it said, and ordered some of the strongest guards of the army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them in the furnace of the blazing fire. And think about it, they didn't take time to prepare them or do anything to them. They whatever they were wearing at the time, They took their strongest men to bind them up. And you think, well, your clothes you wear every day, the stuff you're wearing is all flammable. So he was going to make sure they were going to burn. But you're not going to serve my God, then I'm going to show you something today. So the things you got, I'm not even going to prepare you. I'm not even going to give you a chance. I'm going to put you in what you're wearing because I know it's flammable. It's going to burn. Again, these Hebrew boys knew the history of what their God had done. They've seen him fight over false gods before and vanquish them. So they knew who they served. And so the strongest men bound them up. And so they were bound still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments. And they were thrown into the blazing fire. And in 22 it said, but because the king command was so urgent and the fire was so hot and the raging flames, it killed the men who were throwing them in. When they went to throw them in, he didn't have even respect for his own people to try to avenge his golden image. And said, again, they're serving a God that's so strong that you're willing to sacrifice your own people, the ones that had done your commands, to avenge someone that didn't. So they knew he had no respect for even his own when he done this. Again, they knew the God they served. And they turned my ears to this thing, serve God. They knew who they were serving. And then he commanded the men and said, but all three men, but the three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they fell down, and when I read about this furnace was used to melt ore. So it was big enough in the bottom for them to walk in, so there was enough room in there, because the ore was put into the top and the fire was at the bottom. And it was big enough for them to go in there and throw the fire in, so the ore was to be able to melt. And you think about this, I'll tell you how big this statue was, being 60 cubits high and so wide that it was a big pot that they were throwing them into. So it was big enough for them to go in. And when he threw them in there, he was astonished. Because, his men that were throwing them in when they first walked in, they went into blazes just trying to throw them in. But these young boys were still there. And the king was amazed at what had happened and what he had seen. And he rose up and said to a counselor, said, whoa, wait a minute here. Said, did I not throw 3 men bound into the fire? And they answered him and said, yes, king, you did. You threw 3 in there. We watch you, you had your guards tied them up and bound them. So we knew who you threw into the fire. Said, but if I threw 3 men in, why do I see 4 men now? And then you go back to Isaiah and what he had said. In Isaiah 43, it said, I'm with you. No matter what you're going through, I'm going to be there. Through the water, I'm there. Through the fire, I'm there. So when these boys were in the fire, their God was with them. And he said, but I see 4 men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire. And they are not hurt. And the 4th has the appearance of a god. Now you were worshiping a golden statue. Again, that 60 cubits, that was about a 60-foot high statue you were worshiping. It was about 3 feet wide, but it can protect the men that were throwing them in there. It couldn't protect them. But their God had protected them in the fire, not trying to get to the fire, But in the fire, he was protecting them. So when you serve God, he's got your protection there. He's already told you, I'm with you. I know you by name. I've called you. I know who you are. So that's the God we serve. And that's the point of this lesson get to is serving God. You can't let the trials of this world take you from serving God. You can't let people who think you think can do something for you keep you from serving God. You can't let your situations keep you from serving God. Because you know you have a God that's with you. And have the same faith that these Hebrew boys had. Say, I know my God can save me. When you're sick in your body, you don't give up on serving God and still having to serve your God. When your money is funny, sometimes you still serve your God because you know you got a God who is able. And as the Hebrews say, even if he don't do it, I know he can. That's the God we serve. And we know how much he's brought us through to get us to this point. That's what these Hebrew boys know. They knew when they were serving their God, they knew what their God had done for them and for their people. He knew what they had brought them through, how he had brought them out of Egypt, out of bondage, through the wilderness, set them up in lands they didn't own without having to fight for them. They knew their faith. They knew what it got them, the God who got them to where they are, or were. So they wouldn't give up their faith to serve an image just to appease someone else. And that's the faith we got to get to, is where we don't let the troubles of the world cause us to give up on God. No matter what we're going through, no matter what trials we're into or going through at the time, we still serve a mighty God. And even if we know he's able to save us, but even if he don't, we know he can, so we're still going to serve him. And that's the faith that we're talking about here, the faith in that fiery furnace. And I said earlier, that furnace doesn't have to be a physical furnace. It can be the furnace of the trials of life. It can be that furnace of family disagreements. It can be that furnace of trying to live in a world that doesn't know God. I watched the commercial the other day, and it just astounded me that it's even on TV. On Ron Reagan's knockstick, he got on there and said, I'm not afraid of hell. I'm not afraid of burning in a fire. I said, I'm not afraid of a God I don't see. I said, man, I mean, let's think of how much life has changed and now what we're putting our kids through now. These are the trials we're putting them through. Because when I grew up, and I know when I came up, nothing like that would have never ever made TV. You would never spoke anything like that out loud. But now, this world is putting so many things in our kids' heads and in front of them. And that's why you some of them now say, I don't believe God. I can't see him. I can't see God, so why should I believe him? I've never seen him, but I know what he's done for me. And I know what he's brought me through. So I'm like these Hebrew boys. I know what he's done. So even if he don't save me no more, I know one day I'm going to leave this earth, and he's not going to keep me here forever. Because he never promised me that. But I know what he's done for me. So I'm going to still serve him. Does that mean you're going to be perfect every day? No. We all going to have our trials, our temptations, but still, we know the God we serve. We know what he's brought us through, where he's brought us from, and brought us to. So we got to have that faith, that righteous faith, to keep working and risking. You know what I'm saying? This lifetime was worth risking our lives. And that life doesn't have to mean a physical life. It ain't gonna mean that something that might kill you, even though it is killing you in your spiritual self. It might not kill your physical body, but some of the things we do to appease other people, we're giving up our lives for. We're selling ourselves out for little gods, for little things in our lives that might bring us momentary gratification, pleasure. But are we willing to put those above the God we serve and doing what he's doing because we know he's there to keep us, protect us? And just like Nebuchadnezzar said, when he, in verse 26, when Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of the blazing fire and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Now remember, just a few minutes ago, we say, who's this God that's going to save you from my hands? Who going to save you? If I throw you in this hot fire, who going to save you now? What you going to do now? But now, having seen the power of God, he's calling them out and said, man, come here. Y'all need to come here. I got to talk to you. You got something I don't have. And that's what we should be showing the world today. We got something that the world doesn't have. We got something live up in us that's keeping us, that this world can't give you. When we talk about that peace that surpasses our understanding, that ain't saying your life ain't going to have no troubles. But that say, even through my troubles, I know I serve a God so powerful that it's not going to trouble me. I'm still going to have that peace. Because I know who I serve. And I know what he can do. And what he has done. So that peace of the past, I'll say, is these boys, when they went in, you didn't say one time in the story where they fret or they tried to fight back or they didn't worry about it. They had the peace of God with them. Because they knew the God they served. Even though they were going to a fire so hot that it burned the men up, throwing them in, they didn't fight it. Because they knew who they served, who was with them. So now Nebuchadnezzar, I'm seeing them standing there in the fire and saying, y'all, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, come here. Come to me. And then all his officials then gathered around and they saw that their bodies had not been hurt. Their clothes were still perfect. Not a hair on their head was singed. And you don't been close to a fire. You get close to a fire, it can take the hair off your skin. These boys are in the fire, and they weren't hurt. So, about as many, the hair on their heads was not singed. Their tunics were not scorched. And this is a good part. That even the smell of fire did not come from them. They were in the fire and didn't smell like fire. And if any of y'all been around fire, just getting close to fire, you're going to smell some smoke on you. You're going to smell something. But these guys were in the fire. But they didn't smell like it. And Nebuchadnezzar said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent this angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And that's the very important word there. They trusted God. Even though they knew the situation they were in, what they were going through, they still trust God. They didn't sell themselves out to save themselves, but they kept their faith in God. They lived that righteous life by faith. They kept their faith even in the trials of being put to death in a fire. They still stuck with God and trusted God. And we got to look at our lives. We're going to have in our lives, sometimes we're going to have situations that's going to cause us, it's going to test our faith. It's going to test our livelihoods. And we've got to go through some things like that. But are you going to stand on your faith? That's what you're being called here to stand. On the faith. First in Jesus Christ and his Father, our Lord. We got to stand with God no matter what we're going through. And know who brought us through. and hold our convictions. Think about our race as a people, the things we went through to get to where we are now. Yet you see so many of us turning our backs on the God that brought us this far. Because even this month here, this Black History Month, we should be thinking about on that topic. God has brought us so far. From sitting at the back of the bus, having to give up your seat when somebody else wanted it. Not me to walk to the counter to get some food. Sometimes having to go to the back door to order your food and take it with you. And we're not that far from these times, but we're turning our backs on the God that's brought us out of what we come through so far. And now I'm going to turn this into my activist moment. We're giving up on so many things. And by not exercising our rights, we're turning our backs a lot of times. Even this season of voting now, this is going to be a crucial year for our country. And you got to think about it. I'm looking at it. I say that this is basically a war between good and evil. But are we willing to give up? Because even if we don't go out and turn out to vote, we're giving up. We're turning our backs on where we came from and what we're doing. So we got to still stand strong, stay with God, ask for his leadership. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, but I'm going to tell you to vote. Your conscience will tell you. And if you speak with God, he'll lead you on where you need to be. Because you just look at the standards. Again, as these boys did here, they took a standard. What is this God, this golden image done versus what I know my God has done? And when you look at the standard of God, you can make your choices there on who and what you need to vote for. So I just ask you in this time not to give up on God, to hold on to him, to hold on to that standard, to live that life and be. And it is a faith worth risking our lives for. And we might be back to a time where we might have to put our lives back on the line because the way they're wanting, some of the things are going now. We might be right back to where we were. We need to put our lives, and we got to be willing to do that again, to walk with God and know what he's brought us from and really put ourselves back in that. So just think about our story as you think about this story as a people. And they asked there in this lesson here, one of the questions was, in a modern day story, name a group or someone that's held fast and they believe in right in spite of the possible consequences. And it listed the civil rights activists, and that's what I just talked about. Our forefathers stood, even though in the face of overwhelming peril, they held faith fast to what they knew was right and put their lives on the line. And we might cause to do the same thing. You look at the war in Yugoslavia, where they held fast against Putin. He tell them, I'm going to take your country. They say, we're going to fight back no matter what. So I will not leave them. We just give everyone a gun. We'll fight back. We're not going to let tyranny overrun us. So we got to stand fast in the face of tyranny and be willing to put ourselves on the line for our rights and for the God we believe in. Again, I thank you for this day. I thank you for this time. I thank you for this lesson and for the opportunity to be there, to be here again. If we have any comments from anyone, you can make those. And I know we got started a little late this morning.